Rome, the eternal city, the heart of one of the greatest empires in history. For centuries, it stood as a symbol of power, order, and civilization. Its legions conquered vast territories, its engineers built marvels that still stand today, and its laws shaped the very foundation of Western society. But in the year 410 AD, that sense of invincibility was shattered. The Visigoths, a powerful Germanic tribe led by their king, Alaric, marched on the city. After a tense siege, the gates were opened, and for 3 days the unthinkable happened. The city was sacked. For the first time in nearly 800 years, an enemy army was loose inside the walls of Rome, looting, burning, and seizing treasures. This event sent shockwaves across the ancient world. It wasn't just a military defeat. It was a psychological blow from which the Western Roman Empire would never truly recover. It signaled that Rome, the supposed center of the world, was vulnerable. The sack accelerated a decline that was already underway, contributing to political instability, economic collapse, and the eventual fragmentation of the Western Empire just a few decades later in 476 AD. But what if history had taken a different path? What if the sack of Rome in 410 AD never happened? How would the world we know today be different? Let's explore this fascinating alternate timeline. To understand the impact, we first need to understand the context. By the early 5th century, the Roman Empire was already divided into two halves. The Western Empire, with its capital shifting between Rome and other cities like Ravenna, and the wealthier, more stable Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople. The West was struggling. It faced constant pressure from migrating tribes along its borders, a series of weak and ineffective emperors, crippling economic problems, and deep-seated political corruption. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, weren't just random invaders. They had a complex relationship with the empire. They had served as Roman allies, fought in Roman armies, and had been promised land and payment that the Roman government failed to deliver. Alaric's march on Rome was an act of desperation and frustration born from broken promises. So, in our alternate scenario, how could the sack have been avoided? Let's imagine one possibility. What if the Western Roman Emperor Honorius had been a more competent and decisive leader? Instead of hiding in Ravenna and making poor decisions, perhaps this alternate Honorius negotiates in good faith with Alaric. He could have granted the Visigoths the land and supplies they demanded in the Balkans, turning a dangerous enemy back into a powerful, integrated ally. By honoring the deal, he would have secured a buffer zone and a battle-hardened army to help defend the frontier. Or perhaps the Roman general, Stilicho, a brilliant military commander who had defeated Alaric before, wasn't executed just a few years earlier due to court intrigue. If Stilicho were still in command, it's highly likely he would have mustered the forces to repel the Visigoth threat long before they reached the gates of Rome. With Rome's security intact, the immediate consequence would be a massive boost in morale and prestige for the Western Empire. The psychological blow that crippled Roman confidence would never have landed. Provincials from Britain to North Africa would look to the central government with renewed faith, believing that the empire was still capable of protecting them. This restored confidence could have had a domino effect. With the symbol of their power untarnished, the Roman state might have found it easier to collect taxes, recruit soldiers, and maintain loyalty in its far-flung territories. The loss of Britain, which happened around the same time, might have been delayed or even prevented, as a more stable empire could have afforded to send legions to defend it. Similarly, the Vandal conquest of North Africa, Rome's breadbasket, might have been thwarted. Keeping North Africa would have been crucial, as its grain shipments were vital for feeding the population and its tax revenues were essential for funding the army. Without it, the historical Western Empire was starved of resources. In this alternate timeline, a stronger, more stable Western Roman Empire would have been better positioned to handle the other challenges it faced. The constant pressure from migrating tribes on the Rhine and Danube frontiers wouldn't just disappear. However, a more politically unified and economically solvent empire could have managed this threat more effectively. Instead of being overrun, the empire could have pursued a more controlled policy of assimilation, settling tribes in designated areas and integrating them into the army as federated allies, much as it had done successfully in earlier centuries. This would turn a threat into a resource, bolstering the empire's military strength and securing its borders. The catastrophic crossing of the Rhine in 406 AD, where a flood of tribes poured into Gaul, might have been contained by a well-organized and confident Roman military. The long-term cultural and linguistic landscape of Europe would also look dramatically different. In our history, the collapse of Roman authority led to the rise of various Germanic kingdoms. This resulted in the fragmentation of Latin into the Romance languages we know today: French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. But if the Western Roman Empire had survived for another 2 or 3 centuries, Latin would have likely remained the dominant language of government, trade, and culture across Western Europe. The linguistic map of the continent might look very different today. Perhaps French and Spanish would be much closer to their Latin roots, or maybe a standardized form of late Latin would have evolved to become the common tongue for a much larger population, similar to how Mandarin serves as a common language in China. The rise of Christianity would continue, as it was already the state religion. However, its development would have been shaped by a unified Roman political structure. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, would have gained authority, but he would have done so under the watchful eye of a powerful Western emperor. This could have led to a relationship more like the one in the Eastern Byzantine Empire, where the emperor held significant influence over the church. The great schism between the Western and Eastern churches might have been avoided or taken a different form, as a united Roman Empire would have fostered a more cohesive Christian world. The spread of Roman law and administration would have continued uninterrupted. The sophisticated legal codes of Rome, which formed the basis for many modern legal systems, would have been entrenched even more deeply across Europe. Instead of the patchwork of feudal laws that emerged in the Middle Ages, a unified Roman legal framework would have governed daily life from Spain to Germany. This brings us to one of the biggest changes. The Middle Ages, as we know them, might never have happened. The feudal system, characterized by decentralized power, lords, vassals, and manors, arose directly from the ashes of the collapsed Roman state. Local warlords and landowners stepped into the power vacuum to provide protection and order. If the Roman state had persisted, this power vacuum would not have existed. A centralized bureaucracy, a professional army, and a network of cities would have remained the defining features of European society. The period of so-called Dark Ages, marked by a decline in trade, learning, and urban life, would have been averted. Cities would have continued to be centers of commerce and culture, and literacy and classical knowledge would have been preserved more widely, not just in isolated monasteries. Of course, this is not to say that an alternate Roman Empire would have been a perfect utopia. The empire still had deep-seated problems. Economic inequality, reliance on slave labor, and political corruption were not going to disappear overnight. It's possible that the Western Empire might have eventually succumbed to these internal weaknesses, or to a new, more powerful wave of invaders. Perhaps it would have slowly transformed, evolving into something new without a sudden collapse. It could have become a more decentralized federation, or eventually split into several large Romanized successor states, but without the violent fragmentation that characterized the 5th and 6th centuries. The sack of Rome in 410 AD was a pivotal moment. It was the wound that festered and ultimately proved fatal for the Western Roman Empire. By preventing it, we don't just save a city, we preserve an entire system of governance, culture, and society that could have guided Europe down a completely different historical path. The world today would be unrecognizable. The borders, languages, religions, and laws that define our nations could all trace their roots back to a Roman Empire that never truly fell. It's a powerful reminder of how a single event, a single moment of weakness, can change the course of history forever. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think would have been the biggest difference if Rome was never sacked? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring these historical what-ifs, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.